once again, I'm just really appreciative of the approach that you give, the critique, and as well as uplift, the balanced perspective that you offer, and just appreciate that, and want to say thank you again on behalf of the listeners. And there are some questions. One in particular, Lao Tzu has a question. Um, he asks, "It seems that in the European construct, argument is the tool of choice to determine the truth. What's the methods used to determine truth for from African cultures?"
Oh, geez, he's getting real deep. Brother Laos Tzu ask a lot of good questions, and I enjoy the way in which you formulate your questions and the depth of them. In the European conception of truth, they have a number of different methodologies. I want to go to this first and then go to ours. One, in the scientific method, it's observation. So they use this, and this is their big deal. And there's validity in this idea of observation. You certainly want to observe something to understand it. However, one of the weaknesses of their idea of observation in the scientific method is that they treat what they're observing as purely an object. They don't see whether it's animals, inanimate things, whatever, that they're observing in nature. They do not see it as having any kind of force or any kind of power. And so they don't see this as a two-way interaction. Whereas in African systems, we don't just serve as caretakers for nature, we learn from nature. And as I've referred to before, George Washington Carver would communicate with plants. That's a common thing in Africa and among Native Americans, in South America and everywhere else, because they know that everything God created has energy and wisdom. And so they learn from that. So another thing about the European thing is it's a despiritualized thought system, so that they've tried to rule spirit out of the thinking process. And so it's purely an intellectual academic exercise. And some of that can be very impressive, because if someone has a well-developed argument for something, it's logical, you think, well, it's true. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So this despiritualized nature of Western thought, where everything is intellectualized, and every discipline has basically tried to remove spirit from it, yet all the people who make breakthroughs in Western thought all draw on the spirit. Einstein's theory of relativity comes from a dream, but he knows quantum physics, but he's an average physicist. Freud said that his objective in psychoanalytical theory was to remove the intuitional. It's purely logical. This is an assimilated person of Jewish ancestry. He's trying to be more European than the European themselves, So this is part of their thing, when it comes to thinking. African thought. How do we arrive at truth? Well, first of all, as we started with this system, first through knowing yourself, through self-knowledge, and getting people in harmony with knowing themselves and knowing their nature. And there are a lot of different selves. And for us, we're talking about identity self. Africans didn't have to deal with that because they didn't have someone taking them out of their identity. So it's taken for granted you're a Kemite. Everything you're learning, or Yoruba or Asante, is coming from that perspective of that culture. But since enslavement and colonialism, we now have to go back to basics and deal with this identity, because in some cases it's been fractured. So, but at the deeper sense, in African thought systems, truth has got to do with destiny or life purpose or gifts, and knowing the gifts that someone has. So the first universe to explore for truth is self, the person. One realm of knowledge is, well, first of all, in African thought, wisdom is portrayed as a light that dwells within. And again, African American culture, this little light of mine, there's a great emphasis on the light. That's really referring to the spirit. And so there are realms of, of light, realms of light in terms of what the light is. This little light of mine can mean, let my gifts shine. It could mean that. And so the truth for a person who's artistic is coming through pursuing those artistic gifts and mastering them. But the truth can also come from what I've talked about, and I haven't gone into detail on this, but it's thinking God's thoughts. So the highest realm of finding truth is through piping into God's mind. And for most people, that is just pure mumbo jumbo. What are you talking about? All I can say is all of the innovations in science, music, math, whatever, no one created any of that. They discovered what was already there. And so people who are at that plane, we call them innovators. Einstein, it's not just Black folks, every people have this capacity to reach this plane. And so what you discover is really revealed to you through God's mind. George Washington Carver had these streams all the time. That's the greatest scientist. Me, I've had 2 of these experiences. George Washington Carver had so many, he couldn't count them. You know what I mean? But so that's one level. We have notions of truth. And so part of this, how do we discover the truth is by being trained in notions. And so this idea of ma'at, the notion that there is such a thing as a lie and it's abominable. You should avoid it as much as possible. As I pointed out, the Bombara call it a leprosy. It's a moral leprosy. There's a hatred for lying. And that's a hell of a high culture that can value that to the point that it's normal. Older Black people could reach agreements purely on their word. Because again, it's grounded in some truth, some ethical truth. 1 and 1 equals 2 is a truth. COVID is actually a pandemic, is a truth, but we've got people who are saying it doesn't exist. So there's the realm of experience. There is also realm for truth. But the difference between Blacks who draw from experience as a realm of truth, and that's one realm I draw from, is that there are usually values and deep thought that guide that experience. Ella Baker, I call her a situational revolutionary. That is, she didn't compose abstract ideas about revolutionary thought. It was based on life experience and situations. It made it very hard for the system to define her. But the fact is, her truths were coming out of experience, but they were guided by her life of being born in a Southern environment in North Carolina, where it was a sharing community. It was a communal, caring community. And so she tried to reproduce that in her thought politics, but she learned lessons situationally. Western, in America, the only contribution America's made to philosophy is called pragmatism. And I won't go into who founded and all this stuff, but I just simply say their idea of pragmatism hasn't got anything to do with the truth. It's whatever works. And that's basically, again, the Western perspective, having no word in the Indo-Aryan language for truth or right, then that would not be their concern. So therefore, they can teach you at the university level, well, there's no such thing as truth, or truth is relative. And they quote the theory of relativity, and everything's relative. Yeah, okay. To a situation, yes. And there's truth is like an onion. You peel it, you get more, So that's some of it. We know the truth by being it. That's one way. We know the truth by being informed by God. We know the truth. Most of us know this. When that gut tells us something, we usually know to follow it. And when we don't, we usually have to say, well, I should have. So I don't think that's the whole answer. But I mean, that's part of it.